Ladies and gentlemen, an announcement. We will have now a very important talk about tariffs, and because we have a short extra time today, we will also have our good friend Guillermo Galvis from Colombia giving us a very quick update on the emerald market today in the country. So it's an update that I'm sure everyone will wish to know. And after Guillermo, we will end up the proceedings day, and then the bus will pick us up at 7 o'clock as usual. So thank you very much, Aaron. And let me introduce our next speaker. I have to warn you, she's a lawyer. Okay, she's an attorney. Sarah has been president and CEO of the Jewelry Vigilance Committee since last year, wasn't it? But I met you when you came into the organization. So she's an expert attorney in intellectual property, in money laundering, legal compliance in many aspects, and she has been involved in the legal aspects of the gemstone trade, terminology, and to basically have best practices in our industry. And the topic is really a hot one. So a big warm applause for Sarah Yude. The floor is yours, Sarah. Yes, just press the button.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. As Rui just said, my name is Sarah Yud. I am the president, CEO, and general counsel of the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, because why do one job when you can do three? JVC is based in New York City in the US, and we help the jewelry industry with legal compliance. So that means that for our many, many members, we act as sort of this opt-in legal compliance department where you can get questions answered. We provide expertise on the law in the jewelry industry. And I just want to say a quick thank you to ICA, to IBGM for bringing me to give you this presentation. I'm really excited to talk about it. It's obviously a very, very weighty topic. And I also want to shout out the translators who have been doing incredible work all day today. And I told them before I gave this presentation, I wanted to test a couple of words with them just to make sure that we've got it right. So, the word tariff, I think we're good. The phrase substantial transformation, that's going to be a very important one. Dubious, that one's going to be really important. And then mishigas, I don't know if you guys got that one, but that's Yiddish and it means crazy. All of these words are going to be important for what we're talking about today. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of history of sort of the US tariff landscape, some notes on the recent China tariffs, what has happened this year specifically. We're going to run through about 10 different hypothetical situations, some of which are not actually quite so hypothetical. They are definitely happening. Some of them are more hypothetical because they are probably situations that wouldn't actually happen. But just to sort of test our theories, make sure that you understand how this works. And then we're going to leave plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. One note, I am a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. And so this presentation is not legal advice. This is legal guidance. I am here to try to answer your questions, but if you have a very specific situation, I would strongly suggest seeking out your own legal advice from not me, to be clear. Okay, so how did we actually get to this crazy situation that we are in? In the United States in the 18th and 19th century, tariffs were the primary federal revenue driver. The Tariff Act of 1789 was the first major act of the United States Congress after it was established. That Tariff Act had 3 goals. They're going to sound very familiar to you. Those 3 goals: 1, raise money for the government; 2, protect developing manufacturing industries in the United States; and 3, raise revenue for the federal debt that was incurred during the US Revolutionary War. After that, in the early 20th century, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was passed, and that was in 1930. That law raised tariffs on over 20,000 different imported goods. It was done in response to the Depression in the United States, but it actually ended up deepening the Depression in the United States. It led to US exports and global trade plummeting, and is now generally seen as not a great policy. After World War II, the United States moved towards sort of a more liberal thought on trade, had a lot of emphasis on multilateral agreements with different countries. In the late 20th century, the United States lowered tariffs under NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, other WTO agreements, and they had trade normalization with China in 2000. So this is just to sort of set up sort of how the US policy has evolved over the years, and to sort of highlight why what has happened in the last few months is so wildly out of line with what was going on before. So, in normal times, just so you understand the way the law works, how tariffs are enacted. Customs and Border Protection, so CBP, will implement tariffs through various classification and valuation systems. And so those decisions are usually subject to a period of public comment where anybody, US citizen, non-US citizen, anybody affected can make a comment to the US government about why something should or should not be on that list. It's also subject generally to trade negotiations or WTO dispute resolution processes. And the goal of these is to protect domestic industries. Again, as I've said, that was the original goal of the US Congress when they passed their Tariff Act in the first place. It's also to make sure that countries are retaliating fairly, raising revenue, addressing unfair practices, and generally the way the laws are structured is that not one person can just make that decision. It has to go through a whole regulatory process. So just noting that for the last few years, we've had a general escalation in the US and China tariff negotiations. So in April of 2017, shortly after becoming president, Trump, and I'm so sorry, I don't speak Mandarin, and I'm going to say this wrong, but Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to a 100-day plan for the trade talks. And this was all intended to reduce the US trade deficit with China. So this is something you're going to hear the US administration currently talk about a lot, is our trade deficit with China, meaning that they send us more things than we send them. These talks from 2017 failed by July. And then in 2018, the tariff wars escalated. So both sides started increasing tariffs on each other on various aerospace machinery and medical products and tech things. In 2019, trade talks failed again, and Trump raised tariffs from 10% to 25% on about $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. You may remember those as the Section 301 tariffs, and guess what? They're still here. And so in October of 22, when Biden was president, he retained most of the Trump tariffs and issued some new restrictions on Chinese tech imports. In May of 24, towards the end of Biden's administration, he raised tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, solar cells, steel, aluminum, and medical equipment. Again, you might be thinking, we are at a jewelry and gems conference. Why am I talking about this? I'm just trying to give you a really broad picture of the environment that we're living in the United States right now, and give you a little bit of understanding and explanation for why what has happened has happened. So, what has happened? All that nice stuff that I said about a regulatory process, and you get to make a public comment, and you get to be heard, has been thrown out the window because the way that Trump has used his authority to create these current tariffs is under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which is a law that basically says The president can regulate commerce during declared national emergencies. Now, what national emergencies might we have had in the United States? Well, Trump has declared that the border crisis between Canada and Mexico and the United States is a national emergency. Trump has declared that the fentanyl crisis is a national emergency. And he has used these things to justify enacting the broad tariffs that he has. So again, this bypassed public comment, it bypassed congressional review, and it bypassed the World Trade Organization. Obviously, we're a little bit concerned because this is a real expansion of executive power and trade policy without, a check from the judicial branch or the legislative branch in the US, which is what normally happens. And this act gives him the power to do this pretty continuously. However, Congress in the United States could try to walk some of that back. They have the power to issue tariffs. They've just delegated that power to the president, so they could probably walk some of it back. We'll see if that happens. So, what actually happened with this? Notwithstanding the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, which was sort of the follow-up to NAFTA, which you may be more familiar with, which is supposed to allow duty-free imports in between the United States, Mexico, and Canada. Trump announced a plan right after he was inaugurated to impose 25% tariffs on all of the goods from Canada and Mexico to take effect on his inauguration day, January 20th, 2025. This plan was originally delayed 30 days to allow for the countries to work together to try to address, again, the border crisis, which absolutely existed with Mexico, maybe not so much with Canada. And so, they delayed this to try to negotiate. On February 4th, Trump implemented a 10% additional tariff on all Chinese imports into the US. That eventually went up to 20%. So when we talk about the 20% fentanyl tariffs, that's the one I'm referring to. The executive order about Chinese goods also eliminated the de minimis $800 duty-free threshold. So I've been told that lots of gem dealers were using that $800 threshold to send some stones back and forth to the US. Unfortunately, now, if they're coming from China, you will not get to use the de minimis threshold to avoid duties on shipments. China, of course, understandably, I think, has rejected the US rationale linking tariffs to fentanyl control, and they have enacted their own retaliatory tariffs on many US goods. And I'll just note for you all that I wrote this presentation a couple weeks ago, and then I revised it, and then I had to revise it again, and then I had to revise it again like 5 days ago because things keep changing. So I'm actually not 100% certain which version of this is being shown, but yeah, okay, great. Here we are. Cool. So then what happens? April 2nd, Trump is declared Liberation Day as he announces from the Rose Garden a whole list of new reciprocal tariffs on almost every single country based on dubious trade deficit calculations. There's our dubious. And essentially you saw, I'm sure, that long list of wacky numbers that didn't really seem to make any sense. And it turns out that probably they didn't make any sense. They were based on these perceived trade deficits that didn't really necessarily exist, or they really targeted some poor countries like Lesotho that only export diamonds to the US and they don't have any money, so they don't really buy anything from the US because they can't. So those tariff rates ranged from a baseline 10% on most countries to 50%. The 10% baseline went into effect April 5th. The escalated reciprocal tariffs were supposed to go into effect April 9, which they actually did for about, 12 hours or so. And then they announced that they were going to walk those back. So Canada and Mexico are exempt from that 10% baseline tariff because what they've negotiated with Canada and Mexico is they have a 25% border-related tariffs, but they are exempting goods that fall under the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. So And basically with that, the classification for those goods is quite complicated, but essentially, if all of the component parts of a product are from the US, Canada, and Mexico, it's probably exempt under the USMCA. Along with that announcement, the China tariffs were announced as 34% on top of the 20% fentanyl related. That ultimately ballooned all the way up to 125%, and China retaliated on the US. And that's when you saw shipments just completely stop between China and the United States, because nobody was willing to pay what was essentially a minimum 145% tariff. Because you have to remember that these tariffs, all of these retaliatory tariffs, are all on top of any existing tariffs that you were already paying. So if you were already paying 13.3% for your diamond jewelry coming in from China, you were going to be paying 13.3% plus 145% tariffs on those goods. No one's going to pay that. And so everybody sort of stopped. I heard some really fun rumors from the US trade that an Indian diamond dealer hired a 747 and filled it with diamonds and shipped them all to the United States before the tariffs were announced. That one was cool. I heard just some fun rumors about negotiating for space on vessels and things like that. I think that absolutely was happening. And people were really trying to make sure that they got their goods into the country. And I think you can see that some of the sort of like data aggregators will show that there are more diamonds now in the US than there were before these tariffs. So the afternoon of April 9th, Trump announced a 90-day pause to negotiate these rates with each individual country. And so then on May 12th, this is my last revised one, yay. May 12th, Trump announced a 90-day deal with China to go back to that 10% baseline tariff, plus the 20% fentanyl, so 30% total, plus again, whatever you were paying beforehand. Do you all agree with me that this is really complicated? And unnecessarily so, probably. Yeah? Okay, great. So I also want to just note that de minimis threshold issue. So that February 25 executive order eliminated the $800 de minimis threshold. So it previously meant that you could send duty-free goods that were valued under $800 straight in. And this was the sort of Temu and Shein model for goods coming into the United States. These Chinese companies were just drop shipping, couches without having to pay duties on them because they were under $800. So now all Chinese imports, regardless of value, are subject to the applicable tariffs and duties. Obviously, this really impacts small shipments and e-commerce, including international jewelry transactions under $800. We're also a little bit concerned that it could slow down customs clearance time for goods, because there's just going to be a higher incidence of goods trying to get through customs, and it'll increase costs because we're going to have to just pay more for shipping and everything like that. So our recommendation is reviewing your shipping procedures. We strongly recommend working with a customs broker if you're not already. They have just so much knowledge about the intricacies of these systems and the way that they work. And they can help make sure that your shipments are documented and properly classified and will actually make it into the US. Okay, so just a sort of notes about what is different from the policies, under Trump. So first, it's the use of IEEPA to impose those blanket tariffs. Second, the elimination of the de minimis threshold, as we've talked about. Third, they are using these trade tools for geopolitical leverage. So linking the tariffs to the fentanyl crisis, but also making every single country come and negotiate with them individually is a power move. It doesn't always work, as you can see with China. So they escalated everything up to 145%, and then they backed down because the U.S. economy was tanking and the bond market was unstable, and all of these things were making it really, really, people were not investing in the future because you couldn't predict the future. it's also, an environment for escalation, retaliatory escalation. So both China and Canada have imposed counter tariffs. The EU was threatening counter tariffs, specifically on diamonds. And other countries had said that they were probably going to do this, but nobody had quite announced exactly what they were going to do. So this is different than, what US policy has been up until this point. Also, we're creating this precedent where, future administrations can use this sort of playbook for unrelated emergencies that maybe aren't actually real emergencies, which, gives us some pause. So, as I've said, under IEPA, you're supposed to be able, before IEPA, you're supposed to be able to have a comment period and do all these things. But because he is using this, it allows him to regulate commerce in response to the national emergencies. And then these tariffs will remain in effect indefinitely until the president determines that the national emergency is over. He can also continue to increase these rates, as you've seen. He has said what the rates are, and then the next day said, nope, it's not going to be that, and then changed his mind. And so, one thing that we at JVC are concerned about and have been saying to people is a 90-day pause is just a pause. It does not mean that at the end of 90 days it's over. It does mean that there are 90 days to negotiate what this rate is going to be, but you can't plan. That's the scary part right now, I think, is that it's really, really difficult to plan for what happens after these pauses when we have when there are no restrictions on what could happen. So some of our sort of, practical implications here, obviously global supply chains were pretty disrupted. I think you all understood that. On my way here, I happened to fly over the Panama Canal, and I saw that there were a number of ships on the Pacific side, container ships that were completely empty, just hanging out outside the Panama Canal, waiting to be told what to do. And I thought that was, it's really interesting because we know that the shipping levels from China are significantly down, because of these tariffs. So there's no clear off-ramp for this, unfortunately. This emergency could last indefinitely. Obviously, this is causing legal instability. It's causing financial instability. There's creating this precedent for hiking tariffs without any process. It creates compliance chaos because we all now have to remember and go back to our original classifications of country of mining and country of origin and certification demands. And then also, again, this sort of piecemeal negotiation is really scary because each country has to come and negotiate some deal. And that what that means is that some countries are going to find relief before others. So on May 8th, the United States announced their first trade deal, and they said they had agreed to a framework with the UK. Interestingly, that deal leaves the existing 10% baseline tariff in place, but it allows some relief for products that the two countries deemed were important to them. So steel and beef and other agricultural products were going to have an easier path. In that deal, if you read the sort of statement from the White House, both countries made commitments on economic security and intellectual property. That's about as much as we know. They haven't announced any further details. It's unclear if any progress has been made, but I think that 10% baseline tariff is an enormous clue as to what is going to happen. I don't think any country is going to negotiate a deal with the United States that will be lower than that 10% baseline threshold. So if you can plan for nothing, one thing you can probably guess is that it will be a 10% minimum baseline. The way that we do our work at JVC is, we're pretty deep in this regulatory process. We read lots of, unfortunately, I have to go to the whitehouse.gov website every day and read the news and see what's going on. But reading those frameworks is actually really does, clue us in as to what is going to happen with other countries. Before I go to the hypotheticals, one other thing that I learned recently about the China deal. So, we're on this 90-day pause with China, and there was an executive order issued which said, okay, we have a 90-day pause with China, so we're going back to the 10% baseline plus the 20% fentanyl. You may recall that the first escalation with China went to 84%, it was 34%, and then 84%, and then 125%. In the executive order that announced the pause, they eliminated the 84% and the 125%. So right now that 34% is still in place, but the higher escalations are not. And what we think that means, and again, this is conjecture, but what we think that means is that the US administration does not have a huge appetite to continue this escalating war with China. They saw what it did to the US economy. Enough folks spoke up, talked to their representatives, talked to the executive government and said, this does not work. You are making trade absolutely impossible. And so if that 90 days expires and they have not negotiated a deal, my best guess is that it's going to go back up to that 34%. So that means it would be the 34% baseline tariff plus the 20% fentanyl plus, again, whatever you were paying beforehand. Okay, moving on to some of our hypotheticals, some of which are very goofy and some of which are totally things that really happen. Okay, so our first hypothetical, this is what we do in law school, by the way. We look at hypothetical situations and try to figure out what the answer is and how this would work. So this feels very natural. Let's say we have a rough diamond that's mined in Botswana. It is cut in India to 0.6 carats and imported into the US. Which tariff applies? Our country of mining is Botswana. Our country of origin is India. So this currently will be subject to the 10% India tariff under the current rates because it has been cut and polished in India, and cutting and polishing is considered a substantial transformation. So what that means is under the law, even though that diamond was mined in Botswana, because it was cut and polished in India, it is now a product of the country of India. You also, by the way, still have to deal with Russian sanctions. So you must file a self-certification that that diamond is not of Russian origin. So don't forget that. Our second hypothetical, if jewelry is cast in the United States and exported along with old stock emeralds for setting in Hong Kong and re-imported for sale, the answer to origin is the United States, because it turns out that casting is substantial transformation, but setting gemstones is not. So that ring is US origin, and so you only are going to pay the tariff on the cost of labor in Hong Kong. And P.S., the United States treats Hong Kong like it's China, so all those China tariffs will apply. Okay. Let's say you're in the United States and a customer purchases, that is supposed to say that you purchase a ring from a customer and you send it to Thailand to get it repaired and it's returned. It is actually quite possible that that ring will be excluded from any tariffs because there are certain codes that allow you to send things out for repair and get them back without paying tariffs on them. So that is one where you would want to explore. There's about 10 codes that are specifically for, repairs or displays or things like that. Those are still considered tariff-free. Okay, our scenario, we have a necklace. It is made with Italian gold chain. It is set with stones in Mexico. The origin of that necklace is going to be Italy. So under the current policy, there's a 25% tariff on all Mexican imports unless they're qualified for USMCA. This necklace even though it was set with stones in Mexico, is still going to be a product of Italy because setting is not substantial transformation. So the tariff is still going to be the 10% EU tariff right now. Okay, let's say you found a Canadian gold chain manufacturer and you sent that gold chain to get set with stones in Mexico. That's going to be Canada origin. And we think that because this necklace is Canadian gold and set in Mexico, it likely does qualify for the USMCA, and therefore it would come in duty-free. Again, I'm aware that not all of these scenarios make a lot of sense, but again, I'm just trying to illustrate the complexity of what we're dealing with. So let's say we have a ring set with diamonds from South Africa, the gold was mined in Peru, and everything was cast and assembled in India. That is going to be an Indian product because, again, casting is a substantial transformation. If that casting was done in India, it's India. And also, don't forget, you have to declare your non-Russian origin for your diamonds if they're over half a carat. So let's say an Argentinian jeweler purchases finished jewelry in India and just drop ships it directly to a US consumer. The Argentinian part does not matter. The country of export is going to be India. The finished jewelry was made in India. Because the jewelry is physically entering from India and never passes through Argentina, you will be paying the India tariff. There's only 10, I promise. Okay, our Burmese ruby example, because I have to try to make things really complicated. So let's say an American manufacturer imports Burmese rubies that were mined in 2024 and cut and polished in Thailand. Country of export is Thailand, but guess what? You can't import those rubies. There are sanctions, US sanctions on basically the entire Burmese gem trade that make it really, really difficult, if not impossible, to import those goods into the United States. You could be subject to what are called secondary sanctions, meaning that you, a US person, has financially supported somebody on what's called the Specially Designated Nationals list, or the OFAC list. That's a list of all the businesses and people around the world that United States citizens can't do business with because they are known terrorists, drug cartel runners, other bad people. And so lots of the lots of the Burmese gem trade was sanctioned because of the military coup. Cool, I didn't change the font size on that, sorry. So our 9th hypothetical, so let's say we're doing a temporary exhibition or a trade show shipment. So a Brazilian designer sends jewelry samples to a trade show in New York, intending to ship them back to Brazil after the show. So again, with the elimination of the de minimis rule, even temporary imports may be subject to tariffs. So what you need to do is use bonded entry or ATA carnet to avoid those duties. And there is the risk of a full tariff assessment if paperwork is incomplete or the item is retained in the United States. So you must make sure to re-export those goods after you have shown them. Okay. Last, our scenario is a ring includes 3 stones, a 1 carat opal from Australia, a 0.6 carat diamond from Russia before the ban on Russian goods, a 0.4 carat diamond from Canada, and then gold from Peru. The ring is manufactured in Thailand and imported to the United States. I see Pearl cracking up in the front row because this is just getting really nuts. Again, I like to think about all the complicated scenarios. So because that ring was cast and manufactured in Thailand, the origin is going to be Thailand, but there are a couple of other complicating factors here. That 0.6 carat diamond from Russia before the ban falls under what's called the OFAC grandfathering license, which basically says diamonds that were extracted from Russia before the ban on Russian diamonds after the war in Ukraine can come into the United States. And then your 0.4 carat diamond from Canada does not require a non-Russian declaration because it is under half a carat. Okay, I hope I've confused you thoroughly so that you ask me lots of questions because we have plenty of time for that. And just, I want to highlight, before I move to the Q&A, what are we doing about this here in the trade? Obviously, I'm here. JVC continues to educate the trade regarding all of these emerging issues. We are communicating with the International Trade Representative, which is sort of an office of the president in the United States that deals with international trade. And so if we can tell them about sort of what is happening with all of our goods in our industry, it is helpful for them as they are negotiating. It's also really important for those of you who do have a business in the United States, talking to your congressional representatives is super important. I advised somebody who owns a very large business in the US recently that he should be calling his congressman every week and telling him exactly how much money he's paying in tariffs. I think that would be very important information to have. But again, communicating with me is really important because your stories help me when I'm talking to representatives and I'm talking to the International Trade Rep's office. And so for those of you who don't know me, now you do. And I'm very reachable and I would love to hear from you about what is going on. And then one resource I'm going to point you to is that JVC launched what we're calling our tariff tracker in April. It was supported by the JCK Industry Fund. And so it's at that website right there, jvclegal.org/tariff-tracker. And it is a live site where every single time the tariff rates change, I can go in and immediately update it. And we are keeping it very up to date. I have included every single gem producing country on that list. We are tracking the rates, and as they change, we do update it. And I also update the date on the bottom of the list to tell you when I last updated it. So if you want an easy resource to find the rates and look for changes, you can go to our website. We have made this available to the entire industry. But I would also encourage those of you who are working in the US or selling to the US, we'd love to have you as a member of JVC to support the work that we do. And with that, I will take your crazy questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Wow. Everybody is. Well, we take a discipline. I think you were paying attention. Okay, Dax, you are the first.
Hello. Good afternoon, Sarah.
Hi, Dax.
So on your tariff tracker, are you tracking both sides, and are you tracking the fullness, or are you just updating?
What do you mean by both sides?
Well, we have tariffs on the other countries' behalf.
Yes. So
okay.
We have listed all of the Canadian retaliatory tariffs because those are on specific goods. So that is a separate list. And if any of the other countries did a specific list of goods, we would track it there. Right now, we didn't do anything for China. We have a line item that does say what the China retaliatory tariff is in that list. But if they set up a different set of goods, we would separate that out as well.
Okay. And it is like, you can see May of 2025, you can see June of 2025, or is it just an update?
On the bottom of the list, there's a date that says data last updated on date.
But not the tracking thereof?
We are not tracking
okay.
like over time.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Doug.
Sure.
Hi, Doug.
I think a lot of people in the room here are concerned about getting loose gemstones in and out of the United States.
Yep.
It gets complicated by jewelry and whatnot. But let me just take a scenario for you to talk about. You have a jeweler in Canada, and they import stones from India, from Africa, from Thailand, from all of these different countries, and that's their inventory now, and they're coming to the JCK show. Are they paying tariffs as a Canadian on all of that product, or would they be paying tariffs on the Thailand from the Thai stuff, or?
So right now, it's a baseline 10% tariff on most goods, unless it's China or it's Canada and Mexico for the origin for those goods. For this JCK show, if they want to bring in those goods without doing carnet or temporary import under bond, they will pay a 10% tariff upon importation. There is a function of the law called duty drawback, which basically means if you bring something in and you pay a duty and then you re-export it out of the United States within a certain period of time, you can get most of your money back. There's an application process. It can take up to a year. However, there is also an accelerated duty drawback program where if you register with the US government and apply under that, it is down to about 4 weeks. So it depends.
But I'm not sure you answered.
Microphone.
The question was that these products.
Microphone. Sorry, Doug. You pressed the on button.
Thank you. That dealer in Canada is buying products from all around the world. When he brings those products into the United States, are the aquas subject to the Brazilian tariffs?
Yes.
Okay, so in essence, customs is going to have to look at all of those stones and determine where the origins are.
Yeah. So the important thing to remember is that tariffs are calculated based on country of origin, not country of export. So if you're a Canadian dealer and you're bringing in Brazilian goods, you're going to be paying the Brazil tariff, not the Canadian tariff.
Okay, Charles Carmona, you are next.
Hi, Charles. Oh.
Oh.
Back to hypothetical number 4.
Yeah.
That was Italian chain, and the stones set in Mexico. Where were the stones from?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Under this hypothetical, it doesn't matter because the Italian chain is the controlling issue.
All right.
Thank you very much. David Broff.
I wonder, could you bring up hypothetical scenario 1 on your screen again, which is a really
I might be
key
able to,
one?
I don't
Are you
know.
able to do that?
I don't know how to get back there, but maybe
Okay.
the team can get back there.
But essentially you were saying natural diamonds mined in Botswana, then cut and processed in Surat, India, would actually face the present 10% tariff. Are you doing it? Yeah.
Yeah.
The present 10% tariff, as the country of origin would be seen actually as India.
That's correct.
And not as Botswana.
Yes.
So, I mean, going around the trade shows, talking to people, the diamond suppliers seem to me to be even more hard hit than the colored gemstone suppliers. But if President Trump, at the end of the 90-day period, brings back tariffs of 27% on India, which would be massive,
Yep.
what impact could you foresee that would have on Indian production? I mean, could we foresee, for example, crafting or manufacturing of natural diamonds in India shifting away from Surat in order to legally avoid the 27% tariff in that scenario?
I think it's possible, and I think it all depends on what those reciprocal tariff rates end up being, because, you know, we always want to see, I think everybody in this scenario is going to try to find the lowest impact of these goods. And even, you know, when these tariffs were announced, I heard from a New York manufacturer of gold jewelry who said that he got a number of inquiries from jewelers in the United States saying, hey, can you make my goods here? And he said, well, not only do I not have capacity, and I don't have the staff, and I don't have the trained staff, but I know you're going to abandon me when this goes away. And so these are sort of like larger questions that are very difficult to answer. But yes, I think it is certainly possible that if that India rate goes back up to 27%, you know, folks are going to look to move away from that. I think that's why the Indian government and the GJEPC have been really active, you know, trying to get their government to negotiate a deal with the United States.
Yes.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi. On your Hypo 8, you mentioned that if a US dealer import Burmese rubies from overseas, that has a secondary sanction. But as far as I remember, the Burmese rubies ban has been lifted a couple of years ago. And is a new law for that Burmese ruby import in US?
I'm so glad you asked. There used to be something called the Tom Lantos Jade Act, which prevented the importation of Burmese jade and rubies into the United States. That was overturned. However, because of the military coup in Burma, the US has used a different mechanism to prevent these goods from coming into the United States. So now all of the sort of like Myanmar Trading Company and the GEMS marketing agencies and all the Ministry of Mining itself is all sanctioned on the OFAC list. And so the OFAC SDN list, the Specially Designated Nationals list, is a list of all the businesses and entities and people we can't transact with in the United States. And so even if those goods go to Thailand first and then are imported to the US, you could still be subject to what are called secondary sanctions, meaning you contributed to a transaction that dealt with somebody on that list. So it's effectively banned any new goods from entering the US. That doesn't mean that you cannot bring previous goods. So if you can show that those goods were purchased in 2000 or they were purchased in 2020 before those entities were added to the sanctions list, then you can import them.
Thank you.
Sure.
There is another question in the back of the room. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hi. I hope I got the English right word for it. So I'm going to America quite often, and years ago you had to sign a Weaver waiver program or something, and I think the right word is to waive. So
Okay.
to waive. So if I come into the US. And being I'm a tourist or a business guy coming to the US, I waive of all my rights. Can I say that? Do you understand what I mean?
I understand what you mean, but I don't know enough to answer your question.
No. I'm just saying.
Oh,
So
yes.
I come to the
Yes, I
US
Yes.
with my gemstones, okay?
Yeah.
And I'm a gemstone cutter based in Niederoberstein with German cut stones.
Yep.
So I'll come to the US and say, okay, all these stones are cut in Niederoberstein as far as I got your sheets right. So that's origin Germany, okay?
Yep.
So I have a very nice custom border control guy and he says, you know what? I don't believe it. You're lying. Half of the stuff, as far as I know, he says, is cut in wherever. How do I prove it? And then, as far as I know, the guy can say, I'm not believing you. You better go back or to jail. Is that correct?
I don't think I hope.
Not to jail, but you know what I mean.
Yes.
He can send me
No,
back to the plane.
I think what would happen is they would assess a duty at that time. And it's possible that they will assess the wrong duty.
That's what I mean.
In which case, you can file a complaint and you can get that adjusted.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And he was just asking number 2.
Yes, Mark.
No, I'm good.
I will go back there if I.
Oh, he just wants to see number 2. So thank you very much. So it means they can either accept or not accept what I'm saying at border control.
Yeah, I mean, this is again why I strongly suggest using a customs broker because they will fill out the forms correctly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, David.
Hey, Sarah.
Hi, David.
Regarding colored gemstone cutting centers and the outlook, so talking about Jaipur and Bangkok. So again, if President Trump decides to ramp up the tariffs on those two centers after the 90-day period, so they'll be both facing very punitive tariffs indeed. How could the cutting respond to that? I mean, for example, could we see investments in origin countries in cutting?
Yeah.
For example?
Absolutely. I think that there would likely be investment in keeping more cutting in country, especially if those countries of mining have preferential tariff rates. So that is certainly, an option. There are a number of projects in the jewelry industry that are looking at this now. That are, you have Gem Legacy, running a faceting school in Arusha. There are lots of projects in the jewelry industry that are focused on in-country cutting specifically because it keeps more of the value of that stone in the country. I do think it's possible, but again, it all depends on what those ultimate rates are. It is hard to scale. That is absolutely correct. I would also be curious, honestly, if we see more work for the U.S. facetors. There are some, and I wonder if they would end up doing, more production in the United States.
So, is there any other question? We have 2 minutes for questions. If we don't know, there is a last one over there. The lady, there is a gentleman there, a lady there. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Sarah. Welcome to Brazilian paperwork
thank
and
you.
bureaucracy. We are sharing the same mindset
Yes.
now. Anyway, you mentioned TIB,
Yes.
ata carnet, and drawback.
Yes.
Could you tell a little bit more about those 3 different programs and how
Yes.
could we work with that? Basically, I'm selling, exporting loose color gemstones.
Sure. Carnet is like a product passport. So it's a little card and it says what your goods are, and you can use it to enter and exit your goods duty-free from a number of different countries that have all agreed to use the Carnet system. Temporary import under bond is you do have to pay upfront, like a bond to the US government saying, I promise when I bring these goods in that I'm not keeping them in the United States and I will export them. And then duty drawback is if you don't have either of those 2 things and you do pay a duty upon importation to the US, but then you do export it out again, you can apply for a refund for the duties that you've paid. So those are the 3 different options.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. The gentleman over there.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Sarah. Very good
Sure.
presentation.
Thank you so much.
I want to know how works the transaction between free trade zones. For example, in Colombia, we have the free trade zone and we export it directly to the United States. But what happens if I export it directly to a free trade zone in the States? What could be your advice, your opinion about it? Thanks.
Unfortunately, these duties do not exempt free trade zones. So you bring those goods into the US, you're paying a duty unless it's coming in on a carnet or temporary import under bond.
I think we can accommodate a new, just the very, very last one. Thank you very much. This was
Just really quickly, on the TIB, is there a maximum for the import? Is there a limit? For instance, we have a TIB, we have a bond, but is there a limit on that?
Honestly, I don't know.
You don't know.
I would talk to your customs broker.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your really interesting questions. I'm around. You can ask me more. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. It was really an exciting program. You need a photo op. Let me just go off the frame.